Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara co-founded Grafton Architects in 1978, 4 years after they had graduated from the University College in Dublin, and 2 years after they began their spectacularly influential careers as teachers at University College. As well, since then, at the Accademia d'Architettura in Mendrisio and the École Polytechnique Fédérale in Lausanne, and in 2010 at Harvard, where they were the Kenzo Tange Chair. They shared the chair at Harvard at the Graduate School of Design. In 2009, they lectured in our school. Now it's our pleasure in welcoming them back to Yale as Lewis Icahn visiting professors. Established through the generosity of friends of admirers of Lucan to honor the memory of a great architect and teacher who was for 10 years senior critic at this school and who designed 2 major buildings at Yale, the professorship enables us to invite distinguished architects to teach in the design studio. Since 1999, the following architects have held the Kahn Professorship, sometimes multiple times: Daniel Libeskind, Todd Williams and Billy Chen, Dimitri Porphyrios, Peter Eisenman, and Frank Gehry. Grafton Architects came to international prominence in 2008 when their Bocconi University building in Milan was the winner of the World Building of the Year award. In 2002, Grafton Architects were the first Irish practice invited to show in the Italian pavilion. That's an interesting confluence, shall we say, as part of the Venice Biennale. Their work was also exhibited at the 2008 Biennale in the Irish group exhibit, The Lives of Spaces. The practice has successfully participated in a number of international competitions. In 2010, their design was selected for the new headquarters of the Electricity Supply Board in Dublin, and recently their proposal for the new School of Economics for the University of Toulouse in France was selected. The work of Grafton Architects stands apart from the noise of contemporary practice, rooted in programmatic responsibility and in building craft. It consists of buildings that are bold in character and subtle in detail. Please join me in welcoming Lewis Icahn visiting professors Yvonne Farrell and Shelley McNamara as they deliver tonight's lecture, Architecture as the New Geography.
Good evening. I would like to say how honored Shelley and I are to be the Lewis Icahn visiting professors here in Yale. We would like to thank Dean Stern for his kind invitation. We look forward to working with our assistant, Martin Cox, and our students during this semester. It's been, as the Dean has said, 2 years since we have spoken here in Yale. This evening, we wish to show samples of our work, some of which you may know from before, as well as new work. We use our built work as a method of tracking the making of space in order for us to continue to assess and reevaluate. We go back as well as move forward. When we see images of cities destroyed, we realize how buildings hold culture and civilization. Buildings are the mirrors of our values. They tell the story of our lives in built form. With globalization, architecture's role to hold culture is even more critical than before. We feel places with our whole bodies and with all our senses, not just our eyes or our minds. We as humans are fully involved in the experience. It is in fact what makes us human. Buildings actually envelop us, doing so over time, each day, throughout all the seasons. Architecture is a shield and a protector of our humanity. As more and more of the natural world disappears, what we do as architects in making this new landscape of buildings has deep societal repercussions. This is why we use the term this evening, architecture, the new geography.
Starting, we'd like to, I suppose, focus on three main projects this evening, one in Dublin, one in Milan, and one in Toulouse. But we'd like to, I suppose, by way of introduction, give you some idea of things in the air, things we're interested in, things we argue about, things we worry about. And this first image is a photograph we took when we went to look at the site for the competition in Toulouse. And we just managed to capture the child in the spotlight of the sunlight. And David Leatherborough delivered a lecture in Dublin recently called Shadow Society. And in some ways, some of the things he said articulated things we had been thinking about, where he talked about the modulation of light and temperature at architectural edges has social significance. The mixing of light and darkness at the meeting points of streets and interiors sets the stage for various enactments of public life. And we were intrigued by this statement because we often talk about what kind of presence a building needs to have on a site, on a street, in a city, and how can it act as the kind of backdrop for the public life that it facilitates. And perhaps rather than thinking about elevations and image and language and all these terms that we normally use, that if we think about that threshold between inside and outside, between light and shade, that somehow it's very challenging. This is the Rock of Cashel in the middle of Ireland, a monumental outcrop of architecture and landscape merged. And in a way this represents the other discussion which we often have, which is this idea of weight and mass in contemporary architecture. And with weight and mass comes ideas of gravity and connection. And we love a phrase, a quote by Fernando Tavera, where he says, "When we use the word gravity, we evoke both the notion of weight and of intelligent and thoughtful action. Let us not forget, gravity, physical or plastic, contributes to the temporal or symbolic stability of architecture." But of course, we're also interested in defying gravity, in stretching structure and pushing structure to its limits. And this image of the skeleton of the Lina Bobardi Museum of Contemporary Art in Sao Paulo in some way represents this, where she made this 80-meter span, making the structure feel like it's hovering over the city, making a belvedere, a public space beneath. Or these bridges, the undercroft of this confluence of two bridges in Toulouse, which somehow describe the sense of presence produced by mass bearing down and being borne up, that ancient sense of moving amidst the play of the forces of gravity. And this drawing, which we love from Italian Thoughts by the Smithsons, where they talk about conglomerate ordering and where they express so well the blurring of lines between landscape and building, between object and landscape. And we work a lot with surface and the making of layers of surface, I suppose always looking for a sense of depth rather than thinness. In working in cities, this wall in Santiago de Compostela in the rain, which is an image that we often think about, and we think about Alvaro Siza's description of this wonderful wall, where he says it's a monotonous and vibrant wall, finishing the square, wavering between nothing and magnetic presence. And I suppose this represents the question that we often ask is, how much do we as architects need to do? Can we make a good wall? Can we make something mute but beautiful? Sometimes we need to be in the background, and sometimes we need to make architecture that's in the foreground. And looking at cities, we think about the skin of cities, we think about scale and rhythm. And these are 4 maps that we made of London, of Dublin, of Milan, and of Toulouse. Each 1 hour's walk in each of these 4 cities. And it was really, these maps were really trying to understand the geography of these cities and the kind of layers and grain and layers of history that one moves through in an hour's walk in any of these cities. Because I suppose understanding a city is so much about measures, scales, rhythm, sound, and silence. And Manuel de Sola Morales talks about the skin of cities, and that we as architects need to somehow give cities the attention of a detective who scrutinizes the tiniest clues in its wrinkles. And that's something that we enjoy thinking about. Dublin is the city that we've grown in, a city which we've had our practice for over 30 years. It's a city where we've been stitching and repairing large and small projects. The historic core of Dublin is very much related to the European tradition of streets and squares. And I suppose because of this continuing practice that we've been engaged in over the years of stitching and repairing, somehow that's ingrained in our consciousness, irrespective of the kind of problem or set of conditions that we're given. In this competition, which we won with a collaborative group, 91, to reinstate an urban quarter in Dublin, the project was very much about addition and not subtraction. And that's probably part of our philosophy, is to think more about what can we bring, what can we add, and how little, or if nothing, do we need to subtract. We've also been involved in educational buildings at the scale of primary and secondary and university buildings. And this exploratory project to provoke a discussion in the University of Dublin about the role of the humanities in the university. And they used us as architects to try to provoke a debate about what the role of the humanities should be in the context of the role of the sciences, for instance. And we made this space between a library and an arts building, and made a kind of free space within which anything could happen. We were interested in the idea of the view of the university as a place to which you go to look after and attend to knowledge. That a university is not necessarily about the consumption of knowledge, but that it's a collective endeavor of care where knowledge lives and hopefully flourishes. And so in a sense, we were thinking about a university as a kind of garden. And so we made this unreal exploratory project. We just made a series of canopies and light scoops to catch the sun, protect from the wind, and make a kind of space which might be a workspace or a place of public use. And when we were making the sections, we thought that these scribbles looked like notes, like music notes. And we were reminded of the great traditional Irish musician, one of them, from Cantilevering in the west of Ireland, when talking about playing his tin whistle, said it's not just the notes that matter, but it's the space between the notes. And we liked this idea of making space between things, of making use of interstitial space between existing structures to make this kind of semi-indoor, semi-outdoor world, which might allow free space and allow the world of the humanities to happen. And in contrast, we've also been working in a university building in the west of Ireland, in Limerick University, where we're making a medical school and student accommodation. We're not showing this evening, but what we are showing is a house that we did for the president of this university in Limerick. And we're operating here in a campus which is in the middle of the Irish landscape just outside the city of Limerick. And this image shows the familiar ruined tower houses and castles which sit in the space of the Irish landscape like silent ghosts and actors from the past. And there's something really poignant about the way that these buildings sit hard in the landscape, not really enclosing much territory around them, but somehow sitting hard on the ground and having a sense of presence, both in terms of the immediate surroundings and in terms of the bigger horizon. And we were working in the North Campus, where there's the loose agricultural field patterns in contrast with the more orthogonal grid of the original part of the university, which occupies the grounds of a classical estate house. And so we were working with the more, let's say, primal Irish tradition of these towers and ruins, and trying to stake out territory in a way which in some way was evocative of these kinds of buildings, carving and sculpting the house to make a sense of vertical stratification, and as I say, to finding a way of sitting the house in the landscape which would be reminiscent of these buildings. It's a 3-story house, very simple, modest kind of project in many ways, family quarters to the north, and the more public functions facing the south over the River Shannon. A loose form which somehow adjusts itself to the surroundings, and again engaging with the tradition of Irish interiors, using limestone floors and the familiar welcoming hearth at the entrance hallway to the house, and making raised terraces overlooking the river, making lofts for the President's Library overlooking the grand dining room, and I suppose using the tradition of chunky timber furniture, which one finds in many traditional Irish houses of the middle size, and somehow making windows and deep walls which engage with the landscape, both in terms of its immediacy and its bigger horizon, and using traditional techniques of building of lime render, limestone sills, and timber windows, organic materials which adjust and change with the climate. And probably in contrast with the more stoic or heroic presence of these towers and castles in Ireland is the tradition of a much more modest way of occupying ground and occupying landscape, where farm buildings and more modest housing somehow merge with the hedgerows and the field patterns and hug the ground for shelter. And that tradition is one that we've used in the making of schools, where we hug the ground also for shelter and stitch into existing copses of trees and make courtyards for protection and make foreground or entrance spaces which frame the sky and frame the bigger horizon. And this small project is a little conference centre, exploratory project, again a competition for a group of doctors, again in County Cork, on the edge of a market town, a one street more or less kind of market town. And these doctors wanted to make a building which in some way would allow them to come together as a collective practice, setting up a new model for the practice of medicine in Ireland. And we were using this modest way of occupying ground, of using walls and berms and hedgerows to make the immediate territory of the building to protect from wind, and using traditional elements like the hearth as a kind of anchor to make a center to the collaborative exchange that would happen within this building. And again, working the roof in terms of how one would make a collaborative space, a large-scale kind of workshop. And I suppose it's a theme that we work with quite a bit, is this thing of working ground and working roof and making that space in between the two. And we, in this project, at a very simple level, the idea was that it would be a temporary building, that it would be cheap, that it would be prototypical, and that it would be exemplary. And we looked at how we could make a building sit lightly on the ground with no foundations, using marl floor and hempcrete cement-free walls. So again, I suppose it's somehow trying to refresh a tradition which we respect. And using small-scale building components which could be lifted by 2 men to make the roofscape. And in a way, I suppose this project was questioning and dealing with the economic problems in Ireland, the fact that the construction industry has changed completely, and that new models need to be developed in terms of how one makes buildings more in terms of the small-scale grouping being able to operate in a much more relaxed way to make exemplary projects. And combine low technology with common sense in terms of making a building which would have a rudimentary feel, but in a sense would make the kind of workshop space that these people were looking for in terms of making a space of collaboration and experimentation of new ideas for them. So this building hovers somewhere between the kind of industrial shed and the workshop. And we use this as something to build on in a recent competition we did for a small art centre in Tullamore in the Midlands. And this building occupies the canal, which was once, the frontage of the canal, which was once an industrial thoroughfare. And so we took many of the ideas of the previous projects to try to develop a very economical way of making an art centre which would be a place of work, a place of exhibition, a place of theatre, but most of all a place of joy and pleasure which would draw a community together.
The Nobel Prize-winning Mexican poet Octavio Paz, in his Uses of Traditions essay for the Luis Barragán book, says, and I quote, "To be truly modern, we must first come to terms with our tradition." As we have said this evening, we have been building for 30 years or so in Dublin, and this aerial view of Dublin shows the parks as rooms, public spaces, where you are more conscious of the void and less conscious of the object. The 18th century grain and rhythm form type of cliff walls. They have repetition, not sameness. They have richness, not complexity. In our studies, 50 to 70% of these walls are solid. If you note the chimneys, what's amazing about the chimneys as part of the streetscape, the chimney pots express the individual rooms within that and form part of the tiny air shafts into these individual spaces. Traditionally, in Dublin, special buildings are made out of stone. Ordinary buildings are made out of brick. When we made our Department of Finance, we decided to use limestone. Beside this building project that we did is a pocket park, which is a Huguenot cemetery. And our project touches 70 feet of a city street. We made a simple rectangular plan which allows the sun to penetrate all the elevations and allows a 360-degree view of Dublin from within. The building is set in the context of the city with the tonnage of limestone, cantilevering 3 meters, 9 foot, forming part of the new geography of Dublin. We used a pale grey limestone with a sanded finish. We also used a dark grey Kilkenny limestone, and we burnt the surface of the limestone, releasing the underlayers. We brought American bronze across the Atlantic to form a screen into the threshold. Essentially, the project is about offices, but what we did was that we took the only main possible space for us was the staircase, and we made a 4-story main room, a 4-story space hovering over the city. We made the awareness of where you are, the place that anchors you, as part of your movement up through the staircase, reminding you, especially the civil servants who work within the building, that the relationship of their work and their intensity is to the city of Dublin. Sorry, I just go back. The cloister, what we did actually in this particular part of the Department of Finance was to organize the circulation to the edge, to form a type of cloister, which meant that you had perimeter circulation wrapping the city around the edge of the building. It meant that each worker had a deep framed view and remembering that you're part of the city. We love this lacquered screen by the architect Gray, interpreting the solid and void. So when we were studying the elevations of the project, we were using this as a type of touchstone. We were also fascinated by this amazing project in Stockholm by Peter Selsing, where he used these elemental stone walls. So we made a deep stone and glass screen, a vertical weave of stone and glass, where a person can stand into the depth of the wall and experience its depth. This is an image of the two cities, Milan on the right-hand side and Dublin. Dublin shows a city surrounded with the infrastructure of canals. We're also fascinated by the issue of time, that something that was built 300 years ago as a means of transport to connect parts of the country has now become a place of pleasure. And when we were invited to be part of a competition in the city of Milan, we were struck by Lewis Mumford's words in his book, The City in History. He talks about a friar Bonvaison in a book that was written in 1288, and he reported in the Marvels of the city of Milan that there were already, this is back in 1288 in the 13th century, there were already 200,000 people in that city and its dependent area, and all the figures support a description of a gigantic urban formation that had already, in its exuberance, passed beyond its medieval scale. Richard Sennett, in his Flesh and Stone, describes the contemporary city as the body moves passively, desensitized in space, to destinations set in a fragmented and continuous urban geography. He says the road engineer and the TV director conspire to create what could be called freedom from resistance, making us separate from place. And what we would argue is that the role of the architect is to claim back place, not to be desensitized, but to be part of it. This image is one of Milan. It's showing our site of the project, which is half an hour south of the Duomo, in a position just outside the Spanish walls. Shelley referred to Manuel de Soto Morales as describing the role of architect as being type of detective, where you find clues in the wrinkles of city. And for us, when we began looking at the city again, we're looking at these finds and being reminded of how wonderful and how powerful the Galleria as a rediscovered treasure for us in Milan, or the roof of the Duomo, that stone man-made mountain in the middle of that city. For us, this is a terrific interpretive model made by one of our students in the Accademia in Mendrisio, which shows this kind of hovering stone island in the middle of Milan. We also love Milan because it has a city floor which is carpeted by stone, which is surrounded by various, it's a city of wonderful stone. This is one we discovered to our great delight, a stone called Ceppo. And the marvelous thing about Ceppo is that when it's used on buildings, it's used with absolutely the tiniest joint. So it merges to become a continuous surface. It's also a city layered with privacy. It's restrained. It has in secret interior worlds. This is an image of a fantastic medieval building in the center, just near the Duomo, called Il Broletto. And what we loved about this building was its continuous and repeated structure, but also that it was a place of exchange. And when we were studying the competition brief, we also felt that there was a component in a university that also is a place of exchange of ideas. So in 2001, we were one of 10 firms that was invited to participate in this competition in Milan. We came to the city with sketches in our pockets, looking for a strategy and looking for a grain that would be appropriate. The site is embedded just outside the Spanish walls, part of the Bocconi University. The site here, outlined in red, on a noisy trammed street, moving into the open weave of the university complex itself. And we looked at spaces below ground, because in the competition they asked for 50% of the accommodation to be below ground, which was the conference facilities, and the other percentage to be above ground. And we looked at spaces below ground, obviously like the beautiful Salk Institute and the Sunken churches in Ethiopia. The brief required offices for 1,000 professors and facilities for another 2,000 people, which would be, as I said, in conference facilities below ground. Our strategy was to hold these two worlds apart, to let the space of the city enter in between. So in this interpretation here, we raised, this is the representation of the offices and the corrupted ground floor beneath. The master architect and teacher, Alessandro della Sota, in one of his seemingly absurd maxims, says about architecture, and I quote, that it is about achieving as much nothing as possible. As architects, we understand this nothing to mean the space between city and street, between inside and outside, between ground and sky. The space where light and air and volume are held. It's the space in which we stand as human beings. Materials, on the other hand, are the opposite to nothing. We are interested in making something out of nothing. We are interested in space, volume, and place. We are interested in transparency, which is layers of nothing, illusion, and effect. So we begin our struggle to interpret the project within the structure of Milan and within the organization of the building. Fascinated by the surfaces of the city, we bring a stone carpet right through the project, which moves into the campus. We place the main auditorium on the cusp between the university and the main thoroughfare of the city. We delay the entrance to the central point. You arrive and drop down 5 meters, that's 15 feet below street level at this point, or you move through as a student, or you rise up in this particular point, the place where the 1,000 professors arrive and move vertically from their position. We also make a small street connection into the campus, and we bring students down to the lower level in the plan. Excuse me. We interpreted the 1,000 offices as a raised matrix with all the attic hovering above the city, allowing light to penetrate below. So this is a working model where we're studying the grain. The site was 150 meters long and approximately 80 meters here. And we worked on a social structure of dividing the 1,000 offices into bars of space which acted like an abacus. So this plan is really describing the X's being the voids, the sketches being the solids of the offices, but setting up the grain every 75 feet, that we would set a structural system that allowed for socializing in the grain of the building. And here the sketch looking at the soffits of the building undulating and carving and bringing the space of the city down below. The next important issue for us was how to find a structure that would support that architectural idea of separating the ground and the hovering offices above. So this section drawing is really an important moment in our design, where we're actually saying that we will position the structure at roof level and hang the offices from here. So in this section you have the structure positioned at the roof level, these arrows representing the office layers which are hung from above, and that liberates the space between the city moving through and the carving into the earth at this point. Just in terms of the plan of the competition, the offices, sometimes double-loaded corridors, sometimes single-loaded, the X's with the carving space allowing light below, and the long section showing the Alemannia, the large space set to the city. The short section, and this three-dimensional perspective, visualizing the relationship between the city as you move across the plan to connect students ramping down the 5 meters, the 9 meters down to the lower level, the offices being hung above, and their soffits forming that space, that in-between space. The issue then of representation or finding a language within Milan. Close to our site is this fantastic project by the architect Moretti. And what for us was really important was the fact of the strength of expression in this project in terms of Moretti's form protruding like a great snout, and for us this carving of the section and finding a way of overlapping the expression of the offices and the type of periscope relationship with the Alemannia, that it would reach up from being buried deep into the city, but also lifting its ventilation kind of shafts into the city form. This is a misty, foggy day in Milan that has no river. It sometimes has this incredible atmosphere. You don't know exactly what time of day. This is a kind of nondescript corner of for the competition. And this is setting our project in a pencil drawing into the location, a night view, viewing this kind of lantern position of the Alemannia relative to the city, and the carved, this is a model at 1:500 in reality, where we're pushing and pulling and carving into the earth to allow that connection down to the ground, using the Alemannia like a type of boulder on the corner, and using the library as a type of crust or shield to the edges of the site, and building up the little bars of offices to form these kind of deep courts, shading and allowing controlled light to enter below. For us, the interesting thing about this space, for this here, which is the 66-foot cantilever of the Alemannia. It's in 2 parts for 600 people and 400 people. The street, the city level is at this. There's 5 meters below, 15 feet below is the entrance for the Alemannia. So we were very lucky. We won this competition, and we began through obviously making the drawings and the tendering to begin to make the project. And talk about architecture as the new geography. It is incredible to carve into a city floor, to go down below the water table level, to begin this mammoth task of actually carving the project into the surfaces of the city. So in this point here, we are down below water table level. We're beginning the structure of the building below. And for us, the issue, this on the left-hand side is a photograph of the limestone in the Burren of in the west of Ireland. And what's amazing about the Burren is that the limestone over eons of time has been carved and cut by the process of its relationship to water and sulfuric acid forming with this combination. And when we were doing the competition, this modest paper card model is really trying to describe that relationship of carving and pushing and pulling that intermediate world between sky and ground. And we just wanted to share with you this evening this fantastic image for us of a granite boulder tossed by the Atlantic Ocean, all its corners rubbed off because it's thrown and pushed and pulled, so nothing remains except the circle, embedded, thrown by the sea onto this limestone. And it's something that I suppose we'll be discussing with our students over the next number of weeks this semester. This issue of time and material and the relationship between the characteristics, the physics of materiality within architecture. So we began digging into the Milanese earth, the great feet of the structure below, and we have the 75-foot apart diaphragm walls with 11-foot twin spaces which form these corridors. So the structure marches south down over the site. This becomes this amazing, for us, this setting up of the measure, forming a type of social infrastructure. The roof beams then are positioned high up on the structure from which the offices are hung. with the metal waiting to receive the office as laid in. For us, I suppose, architecture is the art of structuring space. For us, structuring space is a process of defining limits and liberating boundaries. When we show this image of the scaffolding for the support of the weight of the cantilever that's going to come, what fascinates us is the idea of translating an idea into fact, but also translating the weight of wet concrete which will rest on this supporting surface, which will cure, which will become hard, and will become the cantilever. So here is the drying concrete, which forms the relationship with the city. Bocconi then, when we chose the Ceppo stone for the building, the university bought the Ceppo. Bought the Ceppo quarry, which for us was fantastic because they actually bought the mountain. And when we went there, we were shocked because the sloping surface of the mountain was incredibly like the proposal we had for the Alemannia. It was like as if there was a one-to-one model of the project north in the mountains. What was also amazing for us was that the carving, I don't know what it's like here in the United States, but the way they carve in Italian quarries is that they quarry deep into the mountain. They cut the 27 foot by 27 foot by 27 foot. They carve out these cubes and they make these incredible cathedral spaces within which you can penetrate, but also you have fantastic ventilation and light, cathedral-like spaces. They leave just enough mountain. They take out as much as they can, leaving just enough mountain to stand up. These drawings for us, the top one is about lightness in terms of the structure of the building, and the lower drawing is about weight. Shelley talked earlier on about the weight of gravity. This is the 22-meter cantilever hovering over the city. We did the long section where each of the offices for the professors each has a glass screen which represents their individuality. These are the pencil drawings during the course of the competition describing the internal world of the glass for the offices and the crust for the external relationship to city. You're looking up here at the crystal shards of the lapping glass. This is the Ceppo, the outer crust of the building. Then the building becomes embedded quietly into the city context, becoming, as we say, part of the new geography of Milan. We made stone cliffs, we made transparent boundaries, we carved deep caves, and quoting Khan, like the light in the Pantheon where you can feel the cut, we arrive under the suspended structure. We ramp down to the deep into the earth. We have staircases which lead up to the sky. We have places of public gathering. We have a 75-meter structure. I mean, this is the consequence of the 75-meter structure. 75 feet structure. 75 meters would have been better. We have the street level, which is here. We have the -5, the 15 feet below, and then 9 meters below, which is 27 feet below ground level. So you get this social interaction, which for us was a fantastic consequence of the structure. We also have this issue of interconnecting transparency and light. You can feel the force of gravity, the diagonal cut. And as we move deeper into the earth, we changed from the Ceppo, and we used a fantastic material called Biancalasa. It's a type of white marble. The interior then becomes, was once described very beautifully for us like an oyster shell. The interior of what we call the Boulder, or the interior of the aula, has 3 light scoops, and it's the only, if you like, interior cocoon space in the project. We lined this with the Pietra Siena stone. And what's interesting for us, this is a model we made, which is in reality a scale of 1:200, where you see the 600 and the 400 and the 600 seat spaces cut in contours. And when we go back to the quarry in the mountains, what's interesting is that you see these kind of shards of cut in our one-to-one model, if you like, in the northern hills. The hall for the 1,000 people has natural daylight. And the interesting thing for us architecturally is that this space underneath the aula has a primal sense. You're looking at it on a wet night, like last night here in New Haven. You have the wet. You're standing on street level. You're looking into the space, and there's something about this space that makes people want to dance. They do things in it that they don't normally do. There's something about it here which is economous, having a party, getting, if you like, performers to perform with the space bearing down above them. And there's just some words from Pelasma, that's from his book, The Thinking Hand, where he describes the ethical task of architecture and art is so important. In a world where everything is becoming similar, insignificant and of no consequence, they have to maintain differences of meaning. And in particular, the criteria of sensuous existential and existential quality. It remains the possibility of a responsibility of the artist and the architect to defend the enigma of life and the eroticism of the life world.
Just in relation to the 75-metre span, on the jury in Milan was architect-engineer Mangiarotti, and there was a big argument about whether our structure would stand up or not. And he told us we had no courage, that we should go to a minimum of 40-metre span, that we were young and that we should have more courage. So anyway, that was kind of encouraging. Having done the Milan project, we got on a shortlist for the School of Economics in Toulouse, and we luckily won this competition. In a way, this kind of map, sort of broken heart map, I suppose maybe displays to students what we keep harping on about, how one maps places and how maps somehow describe an atmosphere. And I suppose how we as architects, these kind of maps remind us that we as architects, if we map places in an imaginative way, we can reinvent them and reread places and find a way in to making interventions in places. Toulouse is the opposite of Milan. It's a very picturesque, very beautiful city with a big river, the Garonne. We grew to love Milan, but Milan was robust and grey and hard and defensive and quite hard to penetrate, and yet has some of the most beautiful spaces and buildings for us in Europe. And Toulouse was almost sweet by comparison. And the site we were about to work in was part of the historic medieval core, or on the edge of the historic medieval core of this red brick, city. And so, while working in Milan, somehow the tradition of the Italian city, and Milan being a kind of the part of Milan we were working in was quite a rational city, and so it was almost familiar to us in the sense of ways of making city or ways of making grids in cities. But this city of Toulouse was so organic and strange in many ways and new to us, with these kind of buttresses and these strange towers and facades. For instance, this, where's the line? This, sorry about that, thank you. This element here, this is not a tower, this is the facade of a church, which is about 15 meters wide. So you look at something that you think is a tower and you discover it's a wall. So it had this whole other kind of series of surprises for us. And Toulouse consists of something like 30 hidden towers within hidden courtyards where the merchants lived deep in the urban blocks and receded to the rear of these dense blocks for privacy and solitude. And there was this fantastic series of experiences of the way that these courtyards frame the sky, like a window to the sky. And when we visited this remarkable space of the Jacobin church in Toulouse, I suppose there are moments when you think really about what the nature of architecture is or should be. And moments like visiting this church make us think about the fact that the nature of music is described as being inexpressible except through sound, the nature of music. And spaces like this make us feel that the nature of architecture could be described as being inexpressible except through space. And this space touches some unconscious memory, reminding us that architecture has a public role, but its effects are also felt in some private sphere of memory. And this is the church which the cloister which we started out with is attached to this church, which is this amazing kind of space. So when we visited our site, it's a series of layers and strata from the layer of the canal water, the towpaths, the retaining wall to the street, the medieval wall, and the walls of the city. It's at a junction between the Midi Canal and the Garonne River, and I suppose we felt the gravitational pull of the city on the site, that somehow there was a need to make something which would reach outwards. And in a sense, this sketch describes the starting point or the searching for the idea that while in Milan we buried all the conference rooms, in Toulouse we felt a need to bring all the public rooms up, I suppose, high in the space to be able to view the city. And so this idea this sketch expresses is that in the background would be the research offices of the professors, and through this kind of monumental wall that we could make windows to the city. And of those sketches always describe what we try to talk to students about today and from now on, and always is that at the beginning of a project, your search is a combination of precision and randomness. It's a combination of not knowing what to do and having some idea of what you want to do, and it's a combination of the rational and the sort of emotional. So these sketches describe again this thing of trying to see how the orange, which are the public rooms, could be located in a way where the more background spaces could engage with these rooms, but could somehow view past these rooms to the world of the city beyond. So our site is in this pivotal space. It's a point where the university site reaches down and somehow occupies this point, this prow, where the branch of the Midi Canal connects with the Garonne River. In a sense, the geometry of the site and the nature of the city meant that we made this kind of collage, in a way, of the elements that we found in the city, of these buttress walls, which are in fact fire escape stairs, of sky cloisters and colonnades and courtyards, and also that we could deal with the climate of Toulouse and that we could make spaces which were actually protected from wind and rain, but still external. And so we made the public room of the university is a central courtyard. It's actually the foyer and the entrance hall, but it's outside, even though it's protected from wind and rain. And so the building kind of inhales and exhales and allows the world of the city to spiral around its edges. And we're always in the project trying to make these choreographed, framed views of the city beyond, be it from terraces or internal rooms or conference rooms. And then looking at the scale of the building at this edge where the medieval, the old city finishes and the new city begins. So we're on the site of an existing medieval wall in the company of a beautiful Romanesque church and adjacent to a very active public square. And in this image at night, we see the buttress of the Romanesque church and the forecourt to our building, where we've made this element which we call the sky cloister, which was to do with making a promenade from the president's office across to conference rooms. And within the building, there's a whole way of circulating externally as well as internally. And the introductory space is a forecourt space, which frames the sky in the way that many of the courtyards in Toulouse frame the sky. So this main ramp takes you into the heart of the building, which is protected from wind and rain, but is actually an external space. And again, this comes from the spaces that we visited in Toulouse, where you get these grand staircases, but they're gated, they're not internal. And there's something lovely about the way that the wind moves through these spaces in the summertime, and yet they're usable and protected in the wintertime. So just looking at the layers and the strata and the building up of this section to make, I suppose, what is the social heart of this university, which is protected from the elements, but somehow always relates to the city beyond. This is what we call the window between one conference room and the other, and these terraces and bridges somehow occupy the space of these deep window reveals. Because we used the brick edges as fire escape stairs, we were able to deal with that issue of safety and escape, and so all the circulation, the public important circulation, is very open and very free. And these were studies we had to do to prove to the client and to the authorities that external, internal spaces would work in terms of wind and in terms of control of climate. And all of the elevations of this building are mapped and are worked in terms of light and shade, in terms of solid to void ratio, and in terms of dealing with the climate. And I suppose this sketch just shows this sense of making an internal landscape and this wish to choreograph the connections to the various landmarks in the city beyond. And again, the section which shows the sky cloister and the entrance to the building, and this merging and blurring of boundaries between spaces which are internal and spaces which are external. And I suppose we do think about the landscape of the city becoming the interior landscape of the world of the university within. This gentle ramp takes you up to the entrance foyer with bridges and terraces which overlook this space. So this is the social heart of the building. And the study models, the crude study models, I suppose, is showing the way that we work using technology, but also continually checking scales and the qualities of space with these models. And looking at the technology of the making of this building in brick and how we we work, I suppose, thinking both from the very particular detail of how we make a building in terms of the actual material we're using, but also how the building sits in the landscape of the city. So we're continually moving between scales, thinking at both scales concurrently. And we feel that this is important for us in the way that we work to get a sense of connectivity in terms of the language of making, as well as the overall language of form in the city. We discovered just outside Toulouse this amazing brick factory where they tell us they make bricks in exactly the same way as the Romans did, that they use the same size molds and the same size brick. And it was like a bakery. It was like a brick bakery where you could get hollow bricks or round bricks or square bricks or whatever brick you wanted. And it was just an amazing kind of place. And so we'll be using this ancient material in a contemporary way in this building in Toulouse. We're finishing with a project which is at a very early stage, which is again making a piece of city, and at the same scale as Bocconi. And we use this Chilida image as a way of describing one of our starting points in terms of how one could think about carving the urban block. But also, I suppose, in terms of a quote by Laurent Boudouin, who was one of the competitors for the Bocconi project. And he, in a text where he talks about the architecture of Sver Fenn, he uses a beautiful term where he says, architecture is a machine for slowing time down. And in our current world, that seems like a challenging idea. And so we thought about making this new piece of city, which is about 50,000 square meters, by thinking about it as a new piece of geography, by thinking about making what is a single-use brief, which is symptomatic of our time, that somehow we're asked to make a piece of city which is of this scale with only one use, with no rich mix of a variety of uses. And so we had to find the space that was missing, to find the component of the project which was missing, which is effectively the making of a public space that would bring the workers within this building together. And so we thought about carving the block in terms of a way of taking south light deep into the block, and use the Chelida image as a kind of starting point, and thought about ways of how the carving of the track of the sunlight in this block would make the public space, which would somehow make space where people would feel like coming together. And that we would make a series of trapped landscapes and gardens which would connect these blocks, and that would somehow tell the worker the time of day and the season, and simple things that we need as architects, I suppose, to think about. How can we make places of work pleasurable, where people are continually aware of weather, of time of day, of the seasons? And we mapped this carving of the block scientifically in terms of taking south light deep into an east-west block, and how that might make a place where people might want to come. And the staircase, I suppose, is a continuing preoccupation of ours, and how the staircase is such a natural place of gathering. When one thinks of... I'm nearly finished. When one thinks of the classic hill town, how important the staircase is. And so these study models for us in making this new project. And we just want to, I suppose, conclude, since we're getting the message or the hint, that we're not making the case that the traditional European city is the only model for a new urbanism. It just happens that we've been working, generally speaking, in sites embedded within existing urban structures. But we are making the case that in developing a new language for the making of new places, that we remember that architecture is the protector of humanity. And together with speed and time fast, architecture can slow time down. And memory, conscious and unconscious, is one of the components of architecture. Our cities are sometimes a collection of dislocated elements, truncated episodes, heaps of objects lacking visual coherence or apparent meaning. We have to engage in the structuring of spaces, not in the abstract mode of master planning systems and networks, but in the construction of a new geography with a human dimension. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for a very beautiful talk. I think everyone is probably slightly in awe of your command of language, both built and verbal. So we appreciate that very much. And I'm sure there are some questions in the audience for you. I hope there are. Joseph Clark.
Thank you very much for a wonderful talk and a very beautiful portfolio of work. One of the things I found really interesting about your talk was what seemed to me to be a kind of tension between two apparently contradictory notions. The one, your emphasis on the sensual, visceral experience of buildings and places through feelings of weight, of mass, or through an emphasis on detailing. And on the other hand, your use of maps. You made extensive use of, and you called attention to this, of maps, of aerial photos, of satellite views, and site plans, which one might associate with a more abstracted view of the environment. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how mapping actually figures into your design process. I can certainly understand how section views figure into your design process, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about the maps.
It's a lovely question, thank you. What is amazing about maps is that they're not the, if you like, the property of an airplane at 35,000 feet. The interesting thing about a map is that when you read a map, you're actually reading the ruins of thoughts of other people. It's amazing, you can look at a map and read spaces. So we don't see them as, they're actually, I find it interesting that you've separated them. For us, the mapping is the sensual description. If you look at Venice and you see, why would you build a city on mud? Why would you do it? And you read the history of the relationship between the landscape and the mud and the power. That mapping is the, if you like, it's the hovering view of the sensual nature of history. Mapping is the scale. What we find interesting in terms of teaching, and that we're more and more convinced about it the older we get, is that you have to be both hovering like an eagle and swimming like a fish, if they're the kind of wrong kind of metaphors to use, but that you're in the water in Venice, and you're seeing it as this amazing, for an architect to read the pattern of city. Like the earlier drawings of Dublin, when you read, even the history of mapping itself is a wonderful thing to study, because it's also about our perception, about how we catalogue edges. So I don't think they're actually so apart. When we map, that's the larger organization of humanity. You map at the larger scale, you make it the more intimate. So when we use words like weaving, when you look at the pattern of this wonderful orange carpet, that there's a certain way of the weft and weave, or whatever the words of weaving are. But mapping is the footprint of humanity. We map out. What's interesting, you can actually put together a jigsaw of medieval, like in Dublin, you can see the medieval, the Viking remnants, the medieval, the 18th century. You can take up this great jigsaw, and it's the technology and the kind of tectonics of, say, 18th century Georgian Dublin, because of the brick ballast coming in the ships, because of the structure of the timber, the span. You can read there's a huge relationship, an immediate relationship between mapping and the tectonic of the time, the structure and the ambition, the great boulevards. You could see the king saying, "Oh, I want that." Well, the road engineer going to red map a red line. I think they're like pieces of a symphony. I don't read music, but somebody who can opens a Beethoven and knows exactly. You open a map as an architect and there you are, the old king was there. The map, the relationship between making and mapping is us. The mapping, Google is amazing now. I think the problem now is that there was a time you'd fly to, Seville, and you'd wake up and from arriving in the dark and you feel it. Now you can go down to Google, you go on the van and you go in there. Turn off the Google sometimes, Sorry.
Question right here in the front.
In your lecture, you referred to...
No, we need the map. We need the mic. No, we'll take care of that.
You referred to space between the notes. As you were designing your different pieces, did you ever contemplate how those spaces are going to get filled when you're done?
When we die.
No, when you're done.
When they're done.
Oh, sorry. Well, we're actually always trying to make spaces that don't get filled. I'm not sure we've ever really quite managed that, but we're really interested in the idea, I suppose it's Walter Benjamin's idea of open ends, that one can make an architecture that doesn't feel fully finished, and that one can make spaces where the unanticipated could happen. I think it's a really difficult thing to do, but it's something that we're actually really interested in. So in a sense, when we talk about the space between the notes, or the Alejandro de la Sota idea of a place where, where to do as much nothing as possible, that's a really challenging kind of contradictory thing to say, in a sense, that that's what we as architects should do, is as much nothing as possible. But it's true in many ways that to make space which is not fully prescriptive, which allows life to enter in, and where maybe the unanticipated can happen.
I think it's also the kind of Zen, the issue of the bowl, and the bowl that contains, and then the space, which is the useful space. And that really, we would be, if you had to come out with a placard and say, what's happening with architecture is that it's so object driven. And we're saying, no, there's not the bowl, it's the void. And that's really what we're saying, that be aware, as we talk to students, as we talk to ourselves, is that it's the void that is the potential. There was an interesting exercise we did during the summer. It was a workshop in a small town, and they were very school. It was an architectural workshop to try and connect to the public, and one of the groups was a group of kind of 14 and 15-year-old boys who did not want to be there, right? And no architectural training and nothing like that. And one of the exercises we gave them, we had brought this little Russian papier-mâché bowl, and we asked them to draw it, and they all draw away. And then we asked them to draw what's in the bowl, the void. You can imagine, And it's kind of a what we call a Laurel and Hardy moment. It's kind of
I should add, I was not there. This was a parting of ways.
But I think there is that issue of the huge pressure on the object, the architectural object now, and that it's all about the vision, and it's all about the product. How can you buy, or who do you get to make an architectural product that a university can have, or whatever? And that I suppose the work that we try to do is more a curiosity of kind of getting inside the thing to find what it could be. There's another phenomenon which we talk about, which happens, is that when buildings get up and running, it's like as if they have a strength of their own. They're kind of muscular things, and they don't want another story, or they don't want another thing. They have an amazing capacity to become themselves as kind of creatures, that they don't want things to happen to them. It's an amazing phenomenon. When Shelley described the kind of difference between, say, Toulouse as a city, a kind of organic, Toulouse being organic, and Milan being rationalist, or a rational city, that the kind of muscular quality of the Bocconi project kind of set itself up as a big matrix and kind of just wanted to sit there and kind of, it's an amazing kind of phenomenon of the space between. You're asking about the void. I suppose we're more interested in the consequence of need, that essentially architects respond to need, and then space becomes part of the project, the creation of that project, the invention. Each project is an invention.
Kurt Schwarzer?
Your references to landscapes are particularly compelling. They really emphasize something that adds a dimension that too often is completely excluded because a building is set off categorically against it. So also the pictures that you showed, from the quarries to the karstic landscapes, etc., like the score of passage of ice and water and very long processes. But that makes me think that in various respects your buildings possess qualities that are very similar to these natural conditions, But what that does to the building and its appearance is it makes it very close to ruins. Because only in ruins do you usually have all of these sightlines open. You can pass through in different ways that nobody had anticipated. From below and from above, you get diagonal views. The sky comes through again all of a sudden. So I was very struck by that, because I just the other day came across by chance a statement by Max Frisch, the Swiss writer, who is actually has an architecture degree and did building, etc. And he, at some point, says that what a pity that most buildings get finished, because it is only when the roof is not yet quite complete, when nobody has put in the windows, that you can suddenly see from the cellar all the way through to the sky again. And that puts the building into this vast panorama of a time process that begins, it's not yet finished, it may get finished, it will be changed, it will perhaps decay, and therefore it opens up all of these not fully exhausted possibilities that most buildings shut down, close off, deny in order to achieve their identity. Right? So
I guess I don't think this is a question.
Kahn was right, because Kahn
It was Kant.
had the same experience and drew them. To see the drawings of Kahn of Roman ruins is actually an experience, not so much only for the ruins, but because of what he turns them into.
Of course, our speakers are guilty of the Harold Bloom anxiety of influence, not mentioning the most obvious inspiration, at least on the surface, is Khan, that comes through so much, even in the artful way you're titled. So do you want to put a word in for the man who's chair you're sitting in?
Well, there are some books which never leave your side, and the Kahn books are, I have to say we came late to Kahn, because we grew up as Le Corbusier fanaticists, one could say. We were completely taken, and it's not late, but later than, being in college. But I suppose, particularly in relation to doing Toulouse, we've gone back and back again to Kahn, and Kahn visited Toulouse and Albi, which is a fantastic city quite close to Toulouse, and made many drawings and sketches of that. So, because it's an Italian magazine, Brick magazine, asked us recently, do we like to use brick? And how do you answer a question like that? But it's also amazing the difference between using brick in Dublin and trying to use brick in Toulouse. It's almost like it's a different material, because you have to find, the joint sizes are bigger, the mortar mix is bigger, the scale of the brick is different. It's a different material, and yet it's the same material. And what's wonderful about Kahn is the way he uses brick in India or in America, and it's work that's continually there. But I suppose it's also the fact that his writings are so profoundly challenging and inspirational, and ask such basic questions, always bring you back to square one, so to speak.
I'm glad the ghost has come out. Do we have another question for our speakers? Yes, up on the George. I don't know what we can do about a mic. We're up there, but we're going to work it out. Oh no. We have super tall.
Well, I just want to thank you. Beautiful series of projects, and very, very carefully done. It was really inspiring. It's clear in your work that there's a persistent interest in breaking down a much larger building into a smaller series of objects, and you spoke eloquently about the notes, but there's space between the notes. And I guess one of the things that I wondered about is there in any of your projects an interest in not building a single building? In other words, is it ever on the table that what you're actually going to set out to build are a series of buildings that create spaces between them, the same types of spaces that you're talking about? Is that ever on the table, or do the projects become essentially a very large building because the demands of program and client and air conditioning, et cetera? Can you speak to that issue as a sort of planning strategy?
Well, I mean, there are many projects that we haven't shown which would have been a collection of individual buildings. And our projects are not that big. We've done one big project, which is the Milan project, which is 60,000 square meters. And that was 10 times bigger than anything we'd ever done before. And the building in Toulouse is 1/6 of that size. But I suppose it happens that the projects we've shown this evening were single use, like a university building, which works with courtyards and maybe has a certain singularity. But I suppose it probably relates to the nature of the program, the nature of the site, the nature of the idea, and whether buildings work by being separate. Like housing, for instance, housing projects we've done, they're separate buildings, they're individual buildings, or school projects we've done where component parts are separated. But maybe it's because we find sometimes we try to always go straight to the core of a project, and sometimes the making of individual elements, expressive elements, and separating out a program becomes very compositional exercise. And we found maybe that very often it's quite interesting to see what spaces can hold the component parts of a project together.
But we are building at the moment. We're building a school of medicine in the campus, the same campus as the House for the President. Near that, we're building a school of medicine, some student housing, and then we're part of making the plaza. So that's also to do with funding in university structures, that that certain pieces are built in a certain kind of sequence. But then it becomes, how do you make the space for social gathering? So you use if you like, the boulders of the buildings to play in the landscape. So it depends on the size of the commission. In the Bocconi project, that was really, they had already full planning permission for a previous project. They weren't happy with it. They went internationally to try and find something, but it was part of a city block. So there were other competitors in that competition. When that competition was decided, and there was an exhibition of all 10 in the Galleria, in an exhibition in the Galleria, you saw the various other competitors and what they had submitted, and some of them had done, if you like, objects within that. But it's the interesting thing, I suppose, in city, going back to the question on mapping, is that when you build in city, in the kind of established grain of a European city, there tends to be a kind of not quite join the dots, but you're within a structure that's wonderful to be part of, a symphony. So the issue, I mean, it is something that I personally find challenging. I was recently in Tampa in Florida, and realized that to the American sensibility, the car is a jacket. It's not a machine that you get into in a space, and that it's a different sense of space. So I'm very conscious that I don't understand really the American word and city in the same way as I understand it in a European sense, and that maybe the projects that we do are embedded in existing kind of containers, if you like, where maybe there's another issue which is to do with the going back to that Richard Sennett thing, where his comment about that the modern city has no resistance to you. There's fluid, and you have no resistance. You have nothing to stop you in a place. So it's a kind of a roundabout. I suppose it's to do with the scale of our projects. If you got the issue, if you had thousands and thousands of square meters to deal with. But it's something I suppose we talk about, is that one of the main problems with master planning and large scale is that sometimes it's not enough when there's a single mind doing so big. We would argue, like when we won that project in central Dublin in 1991, we had worked with a group of like-minded architects to create a group 91, and we had done with Dublin City Council a project where we divided a site up into 8 kind of slices and shared them, and that that city is also, we were talking today, the Senate also in his book, The Flesh and Stone, quotes Aristotle, and to paraphrase Aristotle, excuse me, is that cities are made up, they're not just made by one type, you have to have mix, you have to have difference. And that maybe if the projects were much larger, one of the things that Shelley is a very outspoken about is that really things should be divided up and shared among groups of architects. So you get different sensibilities and different grits rather than the toothpaste version of, the big project just being too big for a single architectural firm to handle. And it also is an issue of scale and materiality.
Okay, Jeff Shearcroft has a question, and then Eduardo, and then we will break it up because we have to go on to the most important part of the evening.
That was very loud. I'm very interested in your attitude towards the image of your buildings. In your discussion, you talk about the haptic qualities, you show a lot of sections, the depth, and talk about interiors a lot. And yet your facades, for want of a better phrase, are incredibly well composed and quite exquisite, and the fact that they win competitions suggests that they have a real power. So you must talk about those a lot, at least amongst yourselves. And I wonder how that fits within a lot of the language you've been using tonight about the more kind of haptic qualities. How do you engage with the image of your buildings?
Well, with the Bocconi project, for instance, I think it took us, 3 months of struggling to find not so much a facade, but a language. And we continue, I think what we found was that the connection between the interior and the exterior, not form follows function, but that there's something about the integrity of the relationship between the interior and the exterior that gives you the language. And when you haven't got it, you know it. And when you start to get it, you know it. And in Bocconi, it was by letting the section become the language, both in terms of the shield we made to the secondary street, which was a series of interlocking double-height spaces, which we just let happen and manipulated. And in the more expressive elevation onto Via Alemannia was literally when we took away the facade and just let the section be the project. In Toulouse, it was more difficult, I think, in many ways, because in a sense you could say we were working with the picturesque, and the picturesque is tricky. And but in the end, the expression or the facade of Toulouse came from deciding that we do not want to make a building which exposes itself to the sun and has hundreds of windows facing south. And how could we make a building which has loads of offices but still feels solid? And so we used the fire escape stairs to make buttresses, and we had 50% of it. We had it then because we could somehow work that. We had enough solid to make a wall. And then in working the wall, we were really thinking about brick, and we were right beside a medieval brick wall, so we had to make we still have to make a seriously good wall. So we really worked with how we could make that wall do things, where it's manipulated in terms of light and shade and in terms of depth and shadow, because we didn't want to make a flat building, because the light and shade, like in this building, which is wonderful, the way that the manipulation of the surface gives you the light and shade. So while and thank you I was afraid of the question you were going to ask me for some reason. I don't know why. I thought you were going to ask me a really, really hard question. This is hard too. But
he's a Brit, that's why he has a hard question for you.
But in a sense, it comes out of that interrogation of what it is the wall has to do, and the thing of the effect that, I really do believe that thing that we started out with, that David Leatherbarrow talks about, which is light and shade. If you can get back to the basics in terms of how you make a wall in terms of light and shade, well then it's somehow different. We don't like the word elevations anymore.
In fact, we try to use the word walking pastness.
I'm not sure about that one either. But
put that on the planning drawings.
There's something about an elevation which suggests that it's flat and that it's composed. I mean, it's important and we work with them, but if you have to come to it somehow. It's the really hardest moment in a project. It's so difficult.
There is a problem with, if you like, the modern client and the ability to reproduce a building too quickly before it's kind of grown. And that a client, you can do one of these kind of CGIs and they're really, tell everything and there's absolutely no mystery and no moving along and no development. I think there is that issue of the word elevation. I mean, it comes from the construction industry as it was elevated. There were times when you build scaffolding up and you only had the drawings for that amount, and then you build it again, you build that amount, and it was revealed. So I think we just have to also be careful that the facadedness of buildings, the kind of just the crust and not the thing behind. I mean, it was interesting in the process of the Bocconi project that there were lots and lots of drawings looking at it and saying, no, it's not there, there's nothing there, it's nothing. We were just putting windows on an office block, which it could easily have been, and with 1,000 offices, it could easily have been just 1,000 windows. And yet there's a translation that goes on from need into form. And it is more about the function and the organization. That finally then, when the kind of strength of that is strong enough to stand on its own 2 feet. It doesn't have to have a pliqué.
Eduardo, I'm going to cut you off. Okay, we're mutually agreed. To thank our speakers. A wonderful presentation.